you look at Kojo no Mai, it's got these divaricate twisted branches, a bit like that twisted hazel. And that means that it slows down the sap. And this cherry produces so much blossom because of that divaricate slowing down of the sap. So I went into this garden centre and I saw this plant, and it was labelled Kojo no Mai, and it had quite straight branches, and I convinced myself that because it was young, it was perfectly right, it had the label on it. So I planted it, and about 5 years later I've got a 6 metre high tree full of this blossom. I've got this Pulmonaria here, and these are really good bee plants. And this one, it has a horrible name. It's called Shrimps on the Barbie.
Yeah.
And I think it came from Terra Nova, and I meant to check, but I didn't have time this morning. But I think it's American. I think it came from Terra Nova. It's certainly an American sounding name, isn't it? But
yes, it's a horrible name, but it's a superb plant.
It is. It's a lovely plant. And the reason I sort of mentioned it is because Graham Stuart Thomas, usually the red pulmonarias have plain green foliage, rubra, and they flower very early, and they're rather gappy. They're not great plants. All right if you've got 32 acres. You can find a spot, but I can't grow that. I don't bother with it. But Graham Stuart Thomas found a seedling in his garden called Leopard with brick pink flowers.
Yeah.
And it's almost got like cubes of silver on it. It's a very, very good plant, Leopard. I've got it in the garden. It's very, very good. But usually, you know, there aren't many red pulmonarias with spotted foliage. So this has probably been bred by the Dan Hines team at Terra Nova. And I got it from a garden centre. And they're really good bee plants for the reason that they're members of the borage family. The borage family are very nectar rich. And when a bee visits a flower, they immediately replenish the nectar. And they're one of the few plant families that are able to do that. So if it's a member of the borage family, it is a very nectar rich plant. And usually they have blue flowers. They open pink, they get pollinated, they go blue. So you get that blue and pink combination. And they used to be called soldiers and sailors for that reason. But I'm going to plant this. I have an area behind my summer house where I've tried to put turf down, and every year the turf dies because it's too shady and things get overgrown. So it's been dug up and it's been cleared, and I'm going to make my very own primrose path. A bit like Shakespeare. Nice. My primrose path. That's a phrase that Shakespeare used about people who go a bit wrong in life. Primrose path, because primroses
I've been on it for years now.
Coarse foliage, you see, in the summer. So he always used to talk about the primrose path. Laertes was treading the primrose path, according to his sister Ophelia. So I'm going to put this in there because I know it's going to be a great bee plant and it's going to have interesting foliage and it should grow really, really well. And I'm going to try and forget the name of that one, Shrimps on the Barbecue, but I suspect I'll never forget that name because it's just a bit horrific.
That's probably clever on the plant breeders. Have you grown Pulmonaria Diana Clare?
Yes, that's Bob Brown's, named after Bob Brown's wife.
Yeah.
That is a brilliant plant, but it struggles here. It's a lovely plant, isn't it? Because of those violet flowers and the copper verdigris foliage. And I've got fairly good clumps of it, but it's never, you know, it always looks a bit miserable.
Well, it's one that grows very well for me, and I'm very dry.
You're warmer because you're near the coast.
Yes, true.
Yeah, so not only have you got far more acreage than I have, you have a much better climate. And, you know, I can see this jumpsuit gradually turning green, actually. I'm so jealous of your thing. And the other thing I'm going to plant is violets. And this came from the National Collection Holders, Groves Nurseries down in Kent. And when I used to own a house in Hook Norton, and I went to see it in March, and all I could smell was sweet violets. And I think it was one of the reasons that I bought that house, because it was such a lovely garden and the smell of sweet violets. But I haven't got many violets here because I keep weeding them out. And when my children were little, the one thing they used to love to do was crystallize the blue flowers. Just color, you brush them with egg white and you sprinkle with the sugar and you let them dry. And they make these wonderful cake decorations. And they would make lemon cakes and they would go and gather primroses and, violets. So I wanted to get some more violets. And this one is actually called Christie's Wedding. And it's a pink. It's got a little bit battered because it's been outside being waited to plant. But I love violets because they're another plant that is attractive to bees. But if the bees aren't flying because it's dull, they have a secret weapon. They can pollinate themselves inside the flower. So they'll still set a little bit of seed. It's like an insurance policy against dull weather. But if a bee does pollinate them, they'll set more seeds. So I've got several of these violets from Grove's nursery, beautifully grown, plant heritage collection holders down in Kent. Big garden centre now as well, Grove's. And we should all be using these local nurseries, really, because they're the people that grow these unusual plants and they don't use a lot of chemical jollop while they're doing it. You get a plant that's grown in somewhere, a great big field as a monoculture, and they're going to put routine chemical preparations on it to keep it clean, whereas it's the little nurseries that don't do that. So I've got several of these violets that are going to be planted.
I actually bought a few of their violets, Grove's violets.
Yes.
And they've made wonderfully large clumps in the garden. But there is one thing that happens, and it happens if you have probably a bigger garden. This is one of the downsides, Val. It's coming up. One of the downsides is the fact that you get a lot of visitors into the garden and not necessarily the ones that you like. Occasionally you get muntjac, and muntjac love my violets.
Oh, well, I don't
Discover where the violets are. They munch them to the ground, and of course I get no flowers. This year I'm getting flowers, so perhaps the population of muntjac has decreased somewhat.
Yes, I don't suggest a cure for that, Alan, because I might get hate mail.
What I thought Alan was going to say is the problem when you have 32 acres is people like Thordies turn up and dig up clumps of your violets and take them home with them.
Well, you did it, but you were invited to do so.
I'm looking forward to my violets.
Yes.
And I find this area behind the summer house where they'll be getting sun in the spring, because they're a bit like winter aconites, violets. They don't like being scorched in the summer. So I'm going to put several along there. I've probably got about 10 that I'm going to put.
One little thing that any gardener can do if they've got clumps of violets is they can make a cloche or get a cloche and put it over part of their clump of violets, and then they can have their violets flowering probably about 2 or 3 weeks earlier than if not covered.
Yes, well, I get squirrel problems. I don't get muntjac problems. But can I mention Wilko as it's past?
Yes.
I used to go into Wilko, and they used to sell hanging baskets, black plastic hanging baskets, dome-shaped ones, about 18 inches across, and they used to sell them for less than £1. And I used to go in every year and get 20 of them. And then I'd put them over my prized things to stop the squirrels digging them up.
Yeah.
So I think you probably need to find a cheap source of plastic hanging baskets.
Yeah.
Put them over the violets, and then you'll fall over them in the garden, which is what happens to me.
There are so many things I want to say that you're triggering. One of them is that one positive of squirrels I saw in John Massey's garden, I think it's John Massey's garden, where they have this fabulous drift of naturalized fritillaries, which started because the squirrels took them from the nursery and buried them all by the canal.
Yes, yes.
And now they have this wonderful drift.
That's what John tells us.
Well, yes, maybe it's not actually true, but so there's that thought about squirrels. The thought about violets is that I've always loved violets, and is probably one of the reasons I was drawn to my child's name, is because it is Icelandic for violet.
And it's
a gender neutral name. So with the R on, it's a boy's name. Without the R, it's a girl's name. So Fiola, as it sounds like, is basically Viola, violet.
Yes.
And so I feel like I need more and more of these in my life, and it's wonderful because they flower when he was born in March, so it all comes together. And his name references one of these exquisite flowers in the garden, but I definitely therefore need more. You say you're planting sort of 10
Yes.
violets, Val, are there any that you think I should be adding to
Well,
my small
I
collection?
think the one that is always very popular is one called Alistair Rothschild's, because
Oh,
it's
yeah.
purple, it's quite scented, and it's got very long stems. And when I was first writing, because I've been writing for almost 30 years now, I went down, I did a series on national collections for Garden News. It was one of the very first things I did. And I went down to Cleveland and I wrote up the National Collection of Violets, which was down there at the time, in spring about this time of year. And I looked at the violets and they were just amazing. And of course, that was where they grew all the violets. And they used to send them up on the Great Western Railway, and they'd be in boxes, and they'd go on the train, early morning train, and they would get there into the flower market. So I think they're sort of very nostalgic things, aren't they, violets? You know,
Yeah, yeah.
they remind
My,
you of times
my
past.
grandmother, my maternal grandmother, who started me off on this horticultural road, if you like,
Yes,
she grew violets for cutting for the house, and she had a big
yes,
patch. Don't know the variety. It was a long stem variety, probably etiolated a little bit because her frame that she put over it was a wooden box with the bottom knocked out and a piece of glass put over the top. But it
yes,
worked, and it made the flowers that much earlier. And she always
yeah,
had a little on her sideboard, always a lovely little cut glass pot of violets at this time of the year.
beautiful. I had
Yeah.
a visit. I had a visit. Thank you. Got a parcel. I had a visit from Sue Dickinson, who
Yeah.
used to be Lord Rothschild's head gardener. Sadly, Lord Rothschild died the other day. But
Yes.
she came and then she bought me some plants. And she bought me, after I'd ordered my Groves thing, my things from Groves, she bought me a plant of Alistair Rothschild's, and she used to grow them in terracotta plants and cut them, pots rather, in the greenhouse and pick them for the house, because
Yes.
her job was to supply fruit, cherries and figs and all sorts of, fruit. She would go back about 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock in the evening and pick the fruit for Lord Rothschild's supper. But she also grew flowers for the house, and violets. She grew a lot of violets that she cut. So I've actually got two. I've got a pot that I bought, and Sue also bought me a plant. And she bought me a little apricot one called Sulphureum, which
Yes, that's lovely.
I've had that before and lost it.
Yeah.
I'm
That's-
going to try to take, more care of them, because what happened is I planted them and then I started pulling them out thinking they were weeds, I think. So I'm going to try to, start up this violet bed behind the summer house and hope that it works. And
It
hope
will. Mm.
I was saying that I find weeding therapeutic earlier in this podcast. I do, until I come across something I don't recognize. And then I get this horrible, I mean, fortunately, we have the internet these days, so sometimes you might be able to figure out what it is. But I hate it because I want to pull it out because I'm weeding. But then I don't want to pull it out because I hate pulling out anything I don't know. And in my past, I've pulled out lovely antirrhinums and things because I didn't know that's what they looked like when they were a seed leaf.
I never
Fortunately,
put, yeah.
Fortunately,
Sorry,
in
go
this
on.
garden where my Corsican hellebore, my argutifolius has succeeded, I had a strong feeling that it was something interesting because it looked so evil as a seedling that I left it. And I'm so glad I did, because now I've got several that I could move if I wanted to. On the whole, I try to not weed things out if I don't know what they are. But sometimes if they've seeded too prolifically, you kind of want to do something about it.
Yeah, so I mean, I tend to only pull weeds that I recognise. I will often leave things if I
Yeah.
don't know, if I wonder.
I
But
make work for myself because I'm
Yeah.
afraid when we get to plants like Helleborus argutifolius, which is something, for some strange reason, I love it. And I've always loved it ever since Graham first bought it. And I think it came from Blooms of Bressingham in those days.
yes,
And when it was called Helleborus corsicus. And
yes,
because it was a green flowered plant, it was fascinating to everybody. And it lasted so long because of the bracteose texture of the flowers. But when I get clumps of seedlings of those, I make work for myself because I thin them and I go into the middle of the clump and I dig a lot up, take them to the potting shed, put them in a potting tray and repot them all singly. Then I've
yes,
got to look after them.
yes.
You see what
I
I
mean, you're
mean?
a mad propagator. I love propagating. I don't always get the time, and I had to pull up a lot of primroses from the borders because the seedlings were taking over, and I've got a lot of Barnhaven. So I didn't want to throw them away. So the best beloved potted them up. But do you know, there's nothing interesting that's flowered so far. So I'm going to use them, some of them in my primrose path, along with my violets. And
I'll tell you what, Val, sometimes the interesting shapes and colours, they miss a generation. So you get a generation of pretty ones, then ugly ones, and then they become pretty once more.
Yes. I have beautiful granddaughters. Oh dear.
Now, before we get into our FLOMO, while we have a galanthophile or two galantophiles in our midst, I just wanted to run a question by you, Val, because we do get a few questions come through on our YouTube channel. Cassandra had asked a question about snowdrops because she's just started collecting some special favourite snowdrop varieties, and she wanted to know when to feed them, what to feed them, and how often. And Val, you I consider to be one of my snowdrop gurus. So what would you say in answer to that?
Well, what I normally do, I am organic, but I use a feed that is probably not organic, which is called Vitax Q4. It's probably the only thing I do in the garden that's questionable. But I do use it, and I put it round a lot of my snowdrops are in rose and peony beds. And actually, roses make a very good cover for snowdrops because they're not in leaf and the snowdrops can flower. And by the time the roses begin to leaf up, the snowdrops have put enough back into the bulb. So what I do is I use Vitax Q4, and I'll probably put it on in about, needs to go on before rain, ideally. You don't want to put it on in dry weather. And I just sprinkle it around the roses and the peonies and in the woodland border, and I will do that, and that will be the boost for Helleborus and things like that. And it's phosphate rich and it encourages flower. It's slow release. I really rate Vitax Q4 as a really good fertilizer for all sorts of things, and it goes over most of the garden. And then when they start to go over and leaf up, I have a powdered chicken manure called 6X, and I will sprinkle that round. But I've deviated this year because I have such light soil, and I'm going to use seaweed meal for the first time. It's quite expensive.
I use that, yeah.
Huge bag of it. And because it's made from seaweed, it has a property that adds nutrients, but it also breaks up clay soil, but it binds together lighter soils. I expect it's the gluiness of the seaweed. I mean, I haven't even looked at it yet, and I haven't used it, but I'm going to put that around my snowdrops as well. And the reason I thought about doing it is because Sue Dickinson mentioned it, and I thought, yeah, that sounds good. But the other reason is a fellow galanthophile called Brian Ellis, who I know you know. He uses seaweed on his yellows, and I'm going to put some seaweed meal round my snowdrops as well. So I do feed them. I think feeding, especially for me, with my very light soil that doesn't stick together and is very free draining, it's quite important in this garden to feed things. And I'm beyond the stage of digging out manure. I used to have cow manure from a farmer when I was in Hook Norton, but then it was a lot of work barrowing it round and a lot of time. But then they started using this chemical in silage. They were putting it on grass, and they were feeding it to the cattle, and it was coming out in their muck. And one year I put a load of cow muck on the garden, and it killed all my vegetables. So I abandoned that there and then. So I think it sort of depends. I wouldn't use manure on snowdrops, but I think the high potash, and then the nitrogen when they're in leaf helps.
Yeah.
I'll give it a little dusting of bloodfish and bone meal, which is
that's good.
That's another thing. But the seaweed meal that I used has been excellent. Anything with seaweed in it kind of lights me up because it is such a good fertilizer. And I use the seaweed meal as a top dressing for plants that live in pots. So if you've got, I mean, for instance, I've got 2 big coppers full of a narcissus called St Patrick's Day. And St Patrick's Day is a lovely pale lemon, almost acid green with the trunk. Do you know it?
I don't know that one. No,
Oh,
St.
it's lovely. It's so fresh and bright. And they've been in the pots now for more than 2 years. And I top dress the pots with seaweed meal, just as the flowers are going over. And they seem, at the moment, there will come a time when they get too full, and I'll have to divide them. But at the moment, I've had 3 good years from them, and I think that's pretty good.
I'll tell you another one that's really good in a pot and that comes back year after year, and that's Golden Echo,
Oh,
and that's scented.
I've written it down.
Golden Echo, and it's quite popular now. And I first saw it at Highgrove. I went on a trip to Highgrove with one of the gardeners because they're allowed to have people in the evenings. So many people. This was many years ago, and I went and I saw this Golden Echo, and it was beautiful perfume. And apparently it was at the time. The Prince of Wales, who's now the king, it was his favourite daffodil. So I thought, well, if it's good enough for the king, I shall grow it. And it has been tremendous. But you do have to be careful, because I was given a pot of one called Winter Waltz, which is a cyclaminius type, and it's got creamy petals that sweep backwards and a sort of pale peachy trumpet. It's very attractive because it's not too brash. So I thought, well, I'll order some of that. And I ordered it from a bulb supplier, and I got a completely different thing. It's similar, but not Winter Waltz. So they're fobbing us off, I think, some people.
Yes.
I think it's probably quite deliberate that some suppliers are selling something that's easy to grow that looks very similar. But when you see them side by side, they're not the same.
Yeah.
So Winter Waltz is a good one. I get my daffodils from Quality Daffodils, Mr. Scamp, who grows them in Cornwall. And they're quite expensive, but if they're very special, I'll grow them in a pot. So, I do get a lot of pleasure out of potted plants.
People might remember my my moment last year where I'd had Beryl, who is, I think, it's hard to pick a favourite daffodil, but I adore Beryl.
Yes.
Such a sweet,
Beryl.
dainty, lovely thing.
Yes.
And I couldn't remember where I put her.
Oh dear. Well, I've got one called Beryl's Little Sister, but it hasn't come up this year. But sometimes
Can I just add a piece of schmaltz to this?
Yes.
That was my mother's name.
Oh, Beryl.
Yes.
I was named after my mother, who was an iris.
All right.
Well, the Beryl, my Beryl, I found her. It was great because I just could not remember where. I knew I'd put her in a pot, didn't know where, and then one day I opened the back door and there she was. She was like, I put her in a couple of different places, but I put her in the pot opposite the back door so that I would see her when I go in and out the back door. And so that was a very good thought process. Unfortunately, it was one I'd completely obliterated from my mind. But then fortunately, she turned up and flowered and I knew where she was again.
Maternal amnesia.
Yes. I've had an awful lot of that.
Yeah, well, I once left my pram outside the co-op. I went to get some tea bags and I put the pram outside and I walked home and I made a cup of tea and I had a phone call from the co-op saying, have you forgotten something? I said, no, I have my tea bags. And they said, no, your pram. I've never been so embarrassed.
Everyone asked, was the baby still in it?
Yes. It was on a busy corner on the main road. It was back in the 70s. It was in a more innocent age, I think.
Yeah, fortunately, it would be hard to do that. But I'm sure I've forgotten all kinds of things. Unfortunately, 90% of what I've forgotten is plant names, but I'm sure they'll come back.
They'll come back, definitely. Yes.
I hope. Now, Flomo, maybe this is part of the problem with remembering plant names. There are ever more things crowding into my mind that I want to grow. Loads of things that you've mentioned, Val, and you've sent me off on potentially a violet spree, even though I'm not really supposed to be buying plants at the minute because I've spent too much on baby clothes. But we'll gloss over that. I saw I keep seeing Tropaeolums. If you aren't following Sue, Blethen and Sue Creek Farm, her Instagram, they're on a trip at the moment, back out plant collecting, and my goodness me, I mean, the most astonishing Pulmonaria flower, and lovely,
I
lovely
saw
thing.
that.
Yeah, I
Where
sent
are
that to you,
they?
yes. I think they might be in South America. I've sort of not paid attention.
Because that's Chilean, isn't it? And they used to
Yes,
go to
Yeah.
Korea.
it's
Yeah,
do follow.
really.
If you're an Instagram person, follow, because all these lovely
I'm
things keep
not an
cropping up.
Instagram.
And
I'm
I
not
think,
anything
oh
like that.
well, join it just for this, Val. She posted, I think, a Tropaeolum, but it wasn't named because obviously these are things they're seeing in the wild. But simultaneously, as I was going through my feed, Emma Crawford's wonderful, wonderful Instagram account of beautiful flowers, do follow, had shared a Tropaeolum from the Alpine House at Kew, which is hookerianum. And it comes, I think you can get a yellow version, but this was a purple one. And
Oh,
a sort of lilac-y purple, little exquisite flower with dark veining in the throat of it. And obviously the sort of thing you'd need to grow under glass, I imagine, not one to put out in the garden. So it's a long way into my future that I will ever grow this. But I just don't think there are any Tropaeolums that I don't see and want to grow, even if it is your thuggish ciliatum that I will never probably dare grow.
Thordis, you don't realize just what a savior you are at times, because somebody thrust into my hand some tubers last year and said, try this Tropaeolum. I think it's a blue one. Well, it's not blue, and it's flowering and it's looking lovely. It is lilac, and it's got these open-faced flowers. They're quite small, but there's lots of them on this wiry little thing in the greenhouse. And I now know that it's named after Mr. Hooker.
oh, I don't know it. I must look it up.
Oh, it's so
So
pretty.
I have it.
Well, aren't you lucky?
Yes, but there'll be a tuber for you. I'll make sure that you have one.
I'll try and keep it alive. I think it might be something Atropopurium or something. There might be more to it, but Tropaeolum hookerianum is definitely the beginning. And I haven't dug down into specifically whether there's more to the name than that. But Tropaeolums are just glorious. The winter flowering ones, I think in particular, have a.
Well, if you've got a garden room or a conservatory or a greenhouse that is just frost-free, almost just frost-free, you can grow these Tropaeolums. I mean, and they flower at this time of the year, lots of them. They flower all throughout the year, various varieties. But, the ones that you grow at this time of the year are just such a joy, because they're there when everything is looking dull and dreary, and
Yeah.
they're so cheering.
Yeah, they're wonderful. Val, where are you at with your Flomo?
Well, I'm after another Trillium. I'm a bit Trillium mad. I know they took me so long. I think I probably said on this before that the first Trilliums I grew from seed, and it took me 9 years to get one of them in flower. And I said something along the lines of, to the best beloved, I could have had 4 children in this time. So I don't want to give you ideas, Thordis. But so what I'm looking for is a pink form of Trillium grandiflorum, because most Trillium grandiflorums have sort of reddish flowers, and they do vary. Trilliums are one of those. I don't think they've settled down, because there's a lot of variability amongst the species. So I grow one called kurabayashii, which is actually named after a Japanese botanist, but it's actually North American. And I've got lots of different forms with different spottings and different color leaves and things like that. But I have become a real Trillium nut. I really like them. But I do better with what we call the sessile ones. I'm just thinking if that's the right word. Yes, I'm sure it is. Sessile, where the flower is right above the 3 leaves. I don't do so well with the pedunculate ones that have the stems, because they flower later. I think the thing is that we're cold here. We get quite late springs, and then it will suddenly warm up. And often May is quite hot here. And things like Trillium grandiflorum just don't perform for me at all, because by the time they come up, we're so late, the next thing is too hot for them. So it's mainly the earlier flowering ones that I grow, the earlier flowering sessile ones. And I've got a very nice white form of grandiflorum, and I've got the red form. and I've got a pale pink, but what I'd like is a good strong pink. But Trilliums are really hard to find in the nursery trade. Very few people grow them because
They
that.
take so long, as you
The
tested
9 years,
at the very
yes.
beginning. Yeah.
Yes, they take a long, long time. Harvington, Hugh Nunn and his daughter of 12 Nuns Nursery, they've found a way of getting them to flower in 3 to 4 years, but that's never been my experience here. And they're very difficult things, because when I was a child and Woolworths was the great plant mecca, Trilliums were always in the store in Woolworths, but they were being collected in the wild. So, it's no good buying, these small bulbs from various people, because often they've been collected from wild source, which I don't want. I want to grow something that's been grown in a nursery and isn't robbing a natural population, because the Trilliums are declining in America due to collection, and also deer are grazing them. They've got large numbers of deer there. So
like Alan.
that's my FLOMO. I'm still looking. I went to Edulous Nursery last week, absolutely foul day, lots of flooding around the Thames. I plodded down the lanes and I came away with 2, a giganteum seedling with no flower, so that's going to be a surprise, and another kurabayashii with slightly different foliage. But Trilliums are hard to find.
Yeah, Trilliums.
So
I always think a Trillium is definitely a sign of a proper plant person's garden. So the fact that you have many, like they're like a when you've served in several battles and you've got lots of sort of ribbons or whatever on your. Like, I have many Trilliums. I have what a great horticulturalist I am.
Well, I'm not a great horticulturalist, because mine self-seeded. They make seed pods that are big and aubergine-like, and then they drop their seed. And I was in the woodland border, and I grew the first Trillium seeds I ever grew. I threw them away because they came up with one single leaf, and I thought, they're not Trilliums. And I chucked them out thinking I got the label wrong. Well, they were Trilliums. So I'd already made that basic mistake and had to get another lot of Trillium seed through Plant Heritage. And then when I was in the woodland garden, I saw a load of what I thought was that horrible little allium, and I weeded them out. And then, of course, afterwards, after they'd gone into the compost heap, about a day later, I thought, you idiot, those were Trillium seedlings. So I had to wait another couple of years, because what happens is Trillium seeds are hypergeal. They do something underground in the first year.
Root.
Produce roots. And then they do this one leaf. And then about 3 years later, you will get a unrecognizable Trillium with its triplet of leaves, which is where the word Trillium comes from, tri. And then it will get bigger and bigger, and then it will eventually flower. And I'm thinking, have I got time for all this? Because here I am in my mid-70s. Have I got time?
Of course you have.
I hope so. My son-in-law said to me the other day, oh, you go on for another 2 decades. I have had a new greenhouse in the time. I have had a new greenhouse. I don't know whether I'm allowed to say it's Hartley, but it is. But when I phoned up, the man said to me, Madam, you'll get decades of use out of this. I said, I fear I won't. And he said, well, what do you mean? I said, well, I'm in my 70s. I can't see me getting decades of use out of it. Can you? Anyway, I'm enjoying it. I'm enjoying it.
Oh, a new greenhouse. That's so exciting.
It was exciting. It was really exciting. And it's not as big as my old greenhouse, because my old greenhouse was a wooden one, but it was falling down. It's not as big, but it's got one of those storage places at the back, so I can keep my seaweed meal and my Vitax and my 6X, and I can find them, because there's another person in this house called the Best Beloved, and he uses things and he never knowingly puts them back. So, and it backfired the other day, because I needed my pruning saw, because I was pruning my daughter's roses. And I thought, I've got to find my pruning saw. And I realized I'd hidden it to stop Joe using it to split up the agapanthus. And then, of course, I couldn't find it. I did find it eventually. I thought, where would you have hidden it? And eventually it did turn up. So domestic bliss.
Now, Alan, I think it might be time for you to share some Flomo?
Well, my Flomo, comparative to yours, is, I think both of yours are very interesting. Mine's probably a little bit boring in lots of ways, but I've just been, I mean, I had a birthday a few weeks ago, and I had a couple of shrub roses brought for me. One was called the Generous Gardener, which David Austin sells as a climbing rose, but really and truthfully, they're small climbing roses or giant shrub roses. And I would like more roses with that stature, because I think they make excellent kind of upright, like exclamation marks in a border. And I've just planted two, the Generous Gardener, one on an obelisk and one on a little piece of wall I have. And that's the size of rose that I want, because I think that, I mean, I've got roses that go up into trees because I've got 32 acres, as Val says. But I don't always want those sort of roses. I want the intimate climbing roses, and I did see the Generous Gardener in somebody's garden last year, and I fell in love with it. So I want more roses that are like, what should we say, large flying shrub roses that I can train and tame and tie into obelisks.
I could give you a challenge.
Go on.
Miss Honey Dyson.
Oh,
She's cream, she's American, and she's on the side of my summer house, and she's like a woman in small underwear. She keeps bursting out. But I do love her. She's one of my favorite roses.
well, Mrs.
I
Honey
grow
Dyson
the
it will
Generous
be.
Gardener, and it's a tremendous rose because it's really healthy, really good rose.
Yeah.
I've got it behind the summer house, so it will be shading. It will be shading the new planting when I get round to it.
One of the reasons I wanted it was because it is semi-double and it has a lovely bunch of stamens eventually in the middle of the flower, which are good, of course, is good for all the pollinating insects.
Yeah, so if you leave the last flowers, you'll get really nice hips as well. The birds don't eat. I've never seen a bird eat them, but they are very attractive hips.
Right.
And
Yeah.
because it's a rose that's clustered, you get these big hips sort of hanging there.
Yeah.
And I like those very much. So I never take the last few flowers off. I leave them to form hips. Yes. I mean, I think roses are. I mean, this isn't suitable for what you want, but I've got a lot of time for rosy cushion.
Yeah.
Shrub rose, and it's hardly ever out of flower, and it's very insect friendly, and it's sort of pink with a paler centre. I really like that one.
Well, I was tying in yesterday. What's it called? The single red rose. Do you remember? It's rather like Mutabilis. Crimson Bengal.
Bengal, yeah.
Crimson Bengal. I know the Bengal rose. Yes.
Yeah.
That's quite
And
tender.
I mean, I've got that in several places in the garden, and where it's allowed to grow free, it's 10 or 12 feet tall on a wall, and it's got flowers out, and it had flowers in February.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Yes, my earliest rose here is a little one, a little pink rose, probably about that size, and it's called Pom Pom de Paris.
Oh yeah,
I knew you were going to say that.
It was given to me by Olive Mason, who gardens at Dial Park, when I moved here, and I kept it in a pot for ages because I didn't have a place for it. We can't put things on our walls here because our cottage is so old it doesn't have footings. And the builder said, don't put anything against the walls. So we don't. And apart from one clematis, which came back on its own accord. But yeah, so it's really nice. Pom Pom de Paris, because that's usually April.
Yeah, I put that in my mum's garden. It's a lovely little thing,
beautiful.
and it grows near a ceanothus. I don't know which ceanothus it is, but it's a very rich, big, rich blue one. And the colours together, that purpley blue and the pink, they're kind of just either side of a path.
It's quite a cool pink, isn't it?
Yeah.
Pink is a colour that's fraught with problems in the garden because you get all those warm salmon pinks, and they're really difficult to find a place for. And then you get the really cooler pinks, that. And they can be difficult. I think pink is a real bogey colour when it comes to doing colour schemes, because it's got cool elements and warm elements.
And this shows me how little I think about design, because I've never thought of that at all. I just bung things in and then probably wonder why they haven't worked.
Well, I've only thought about it because I grow a rose called You're Beautiful, which was raised by Gareth Fryer, and it was a rose of the year, and it's a really, really good rose but it's a really difficult colour in summer because it's almost a salmon pink.
Oh.
And I've got some astrantias that grow with it, and they're a sort of cool pink, and they are horrible together. But by the time September comes, it's always fantastic in September, that rose. The colour's deepened.
Well, this Val has been as joyful as I expected, as joyful as we anticipated. You are basically just sort of planty joy in a person. So thank you for coming along for another Talking Dirty. I promise we won't leave it so long next time, because you fill us with so many ideas and you teach us so much about the history and the stories behind the plants. So thank you very much. And I can't wait to see and hear about your primrose path.
Yes.
No, that's
exciting.
going to be a fascinating development, actually. And I was just going to say, sorry to put you out, Val. I was just going to say, not only have I learned something, I've been enthralled and I've been encouraged and I've been, just this moment of joy with you. Thank you very much, Val. But also to you, Thordis, for Tropaeolum hookerianum. Thank you.
It's been a lovely experience talking to you. And it's
Good.
really nice because I spend so much time in my study, just me, on my own, and the only person I see most days, because I'm down a no-through lane overlooking the fields, is my postman, apart from him indoors, of course. But he's up the allotment. He's been banished to the allotment this morning.
Right.
Mine's been banished with the baby. Have you banished Graham at all, Alan?
No, Graham is out in the garden splitting logs for next winter and on the winter after.
So basically,
Good.
they've all been banished. Brilliant. That's why, it's been such a peaceful hour and a half.
Yes.
Until next time, Valerie Iris Bourne, thank you very much. Happy gardening.
Thank you. Thank you both.
Happy gardening, everybody. Happy gardening.
Well, that's because they always are with you, Val. You're one of our absolute favourites. Just generally, not just for the podcast, just in life, really.
And I'm just going to pull a leaf off. I don't know whether... No, it hasn't worked. But forget that.
You're planting about 10, Val. Are there any you'd recommend? Oh, we've lost Alan.
What I tend to do...
Oh, hang on. Don't do it now. Don't do it now. I'm blowing my nose. This will be a terrible point to edit.
Sorry.
It's a shame that I think Alan froze in the course of that story, because I've been roaring with laughter, and I think Alan would have been roaring with laughter, except that he froze. And so he's just been this very serene, smiling sort of effigy.
I went to John Mass's many years ago, because I've known John for 30 years. He said that he bought the nursery off an old lady who used to dry her washing in the greenhouse. And he was scandalised. And I was living in Hook Norton at the time. And guess what? My washing was in the greenhouse. I got out to see John, and I wasn't sure if it was going to rain. So I took it off the line, and I used the line in the greenhouse, and there it was.